In Chapter 4, we're going to start looking at the cultural values, beliefs, and assumptions of helping professionals and their clients, and discuss how these values can influence the therapeutic outcomes. One of the major challenges facing mental health professionals is understanding the complex role cultural diversity plays in therapeutic work. Cultural diversity, as well as cultural prejudice, is a fact in our world. Yet it's only been within the last couple of decades that we began to really look at these pressing issues and how it involves our therapeutic relationships. So in this chapter, we're going to focus on the ethical implications of a multicultural perspective or lack of multicultural perspective in the helping professions. In order to do that, it's really important that you become familiar with the multicultural terminology in your chapter. If you look at page 107 in the 9th edition, it gives you a whole list of different definitions that I want you to become familiar with. I didn't list them all on the PowerPoint because it's something that you can look at and review on your own time. But I do think it's important that you understand the difference between ethnicity, diversity, multiculturalism, and some of those other definitions. I think that we do need to have a multicultural emphasis in our work and in our career as counselors. Culture can be associated with racial or ethnic groups, gender, religion, economic status, nationality, physical capacity or handicap, or sexual orientation. In reviewing this chapter, I noticed that they did add a section on the culture of handicap, which I think is going to be really interesting for us to review. Culture can include demographic variables like age, gender, place of residence, status variables like your social status, educational level, economic background. It can also include formal and informal affiliations like ethnographic variables, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion. We're going to be looking at some premises that multicultural counseling is based on. These premises are things that we have learned about culture and is a basic assumption. But before we do that, I think it's really important that you understand the definition of multicultural counseling. Any counseling relationship in which the counselor and the client belong to different cultural groups, hold different assumptions about social reality, and subscribe to different worldviews. Given that definition, multicultural counseling is based on a number of premises. All cultures have ways of coping with problems. All counseling can be regarded as multicultural if culture is defined broadly to include race, ethnicity, nationality, gender, age, social class, sexual orientation, and disability. People seek counseling largely because of problems of socio-cultural conditions. We know that traditional counseling was developed in the West to cope with psychological distress. So if a lot of our training and the things that we're taught in the field of counseling is based on a Western culture, how are we going to be able to help people who come from different cultures? All cultures have developed ways of dealing with human problems. Unfortunately, studies have shown that there are enduring patterns of racism in our mental health delivery systems. Cultural tunnel vision is a perception of reality based on a very limited set of cultural experiences. I really want to talk about the encapsulated counselor, because I want you to move away from being an encapsulated counselor into being a more pluralistic counselor. The problem of cultural tunnel vision is that it includes traits exhibited by culturally encapsulated counselors. This means that the counselor defines reality according to one set of cultural assumptions. They lack sensitivity to cultural variations among individuals. They have unreasonable assumptions without proof or ignore proof because it might disconfirm their own assumptions. These counselors fail to consider other viewpoints and make little attempt to understand the behavior of others. They're trapped in one way of thinking, and because of that, they become resistant to any kind of adaptation and reject any alternatives that could probably help their clients. It's really important to become aware of your own culturally learned assumptions, because culture can influence your intervention with clients. Cultural pluralism is a perspective that recognizes the complexity of cultures and values the diversity of beliefs and values. So this really is the opposite of an encapsulated counselor. Cultural awareness alone is not sufficient, but it is the first step to cultural sensitivity and to achieving cultural competence. Your chapter introduces the definition of social justice, and in fact there's a whole chapter that addresses social justice and talks about it in your book, which we're going to discuss at a later time. But I want you to understand the definition, which is that social justice moves beyond cultural awareness and focuses on active support and advocacy, including promoting equality and justice for underserved and oppressed groups of people. It's really important as counselors that we become committed to expanding our comfort zones throughout our careers, attending workshops, learning about different populations, coming to understand different cultures. There are some challenges in reaching diverse client populations. So one of the things that we really need to do is become very familiar with our community and resources in our community that can address different cultures. So an example of this might be that you're working with a client who belongs to a certain religion and they have a really good relationship with their pastor or their priest. Don't be afraid to make a referral and encourage your client to maybe have some sessions depending on their issues, maybe it's spirituality, and discussions with their priest or pastor, and then come back and process that in the therapeutic relationship. That way you're helping them to deal with some of their issues in a culturally sensitive way and in a place where they're comfortable, and you can still work with them on that issue in your sessions. Counselors have a professional responsibility to be aware of and deal with the biases, stereotypes, and assumptions that are part of their practices. That's why I think it's really important that you take the self-inventories in the chapter. A lot of this is about self-awareness, and I want you to become very familiar with what your own values are. You need to be sensitive to the client's values and worldview. Just the other day, we were having a staff meeting, and one of my counselors was telling us about a client that she's working with who is a white supremacist. Now, he really believes that there's a superior race, and in fact, he's even sent his DNA into Norway to make sure that he's from a European lineage, which is the superior race. Now, my counselor, of course, has very different views and values concerning this issue. But she said, you know, Nothing I do in the therapeutic relationship is going to change his ideology. He feels strongly about it. He's done a lot of research on it, and it's not my job to change what his personal values are. But he's got an addictions problem, and I can still work with him on his addictions. I can help him understand the process of addictions. I can give him relapse prevention coping skills, and I can still work with him and help him meet his goals of abstinence or sobriety and not getting in trouble with probation anymore, even though I don't have the same values as he does. She discourages talking about that or working on that in session because it's not really something that he perceives as an issue for himself. So they move towards what their goals are and how they can be progressive in the therapeutic relationship. So I think that was really very sensitive of her to recognize that it's okay for him to have his values, even though they're very different of her own, and that she can continue to work with him on his addiction issues and still be progressive. To have cultural pluralism, we have to develop treatment strategies that take into account the social, cultural, historical, and environmental influences of culturally different clients. Our codes of ethics, in any codes of ethics, but especially in the ACA 2014, the one that I had you print off, there are some very specific codes of ethics that address multicultural diversity. One of them is B1A, where it talks about clients' rights. They want to make sure that counselors maintain awareness and sensitivity regarding the cultural meaning of confidentiality and privacy. Do your clients understand what they mean by privacy, clients' rights, based on their own culture? In E8, they talk about the assessment process. Do they understand the content of the questions that you're asking them? Do they understand the meaning? Are they going to answer it appropriately based on the terminology or the wording that's presented in the assessment? These are really important issues. They can have a completely wrong diagnosis if they don't understand the questions that you're asking them. In F7, it talks about infusing multicultural issues and diversity. Counselors need to recognize the effects of age, color, culture, all those things when we are working on treatment plans and working on goals and objectives. Even in F11C, it talks about how the training that we get as counselors should include cultural issues. And if you don't get that training in the universities that you attend, then it's your responsibility to make sure that you attend workshops and do training, find training on your own so that you can continue to progress in this area.